Da 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 da! What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Still no camera. But what we'll do is we'll pop into my channel and I'll be able to make sure that this live is going correctly and moving in a way that, right, somebody's going to get something out of it. I got lessons out of my live show last night and that's the truth, right? And sometimes they are difficult lessons to absorb and to accept. But in my willingness and this is the biggest part of my movement because we got this word this week of, well, perception. And right away last night, when I was giving my first perspective on this word perception, I went straight into perspective. And I had to give that some thought. And in doing that, I had to do a little bit of Googling on the topic because I was kind of confused in that, because I was looking at this word perception in the exact same way that I look at this word, right? Perspective. And I brought that lesson to the table last night. So when I got up this morning, one of the very first things I did was a little bit of Googling. And one of the things that I Googled was, and we'll just go into here because I saved it. I think I saved it anyway. The question I asked was, what is the difference, right, between perception and perspective? And I went into the lessons. I've been into the lessons on this topic for a good part of my morning and part of my afternoon. Um, and it was really difficult. And I'm not even sure if I got this correctly because I did take in the lessons. I took in some videos, I took in some copyright. I even went into Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia, the grand Oz, as far as I'm concerned, because Wikipedia has helped me out so much. And if anybody had that opportunity to give a little bit from their pockets in something that is really, really a good thing, right? Wikipedia is run on the donations and the kindnesses of others. So if you have that opportunity, and right, I suspect that for myself down the road, other than doing those little shout outs to those things that help me out in this process that I'm going through. And I think it's a process that a lot of people are going through and a process that lots of people are going to be going through. And, right, at some time, a process that everybody is going to go through. Well, Andrew, maybe this is something that you might have some insight on today. Hello, Andrew. Andrew is one of my moderators on my Chatters Live Sunday night show. Huge contributor, very good friend. And Andrew says, hello, Cindy. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Andrew. He also says, maybe it could be said that our perspective on something is based upon our perception of it. I gave some thought to that, Andrew. I have a lot of perceptions, and those perceptions are my truths, right? In this process that I'm going through right now, I have to be willing to be course corrected because a perspective I have is going to be different than a perspective somebody else is going to have because it's in our experiences, right? It is in those feelings that we have. It is in putting ourselves in other people's shoes that we can have a better idea, right? It's about being willing to be course corrected. Some of my perceptions, okay, so we're going to say perceptions as beliefs. We're going to look at it that way. And perspectives is taking into consideration, right, somebody else's experiences and their ideas and their perceptions based on those experiences, right? Those insights, that upbringing that we get, those interests and those compulsions that we have. It's all part of that grand recipe of creating the best human being we possibly can, or the pursuit of it if we choose to, right? But it starts with the willingness to be course corrected. And I do believe this word came across my path this week because it was much needed. I was deep in my perceptions because my perceptions are part of the obstacles, right, in the path of my movement forward. And we're going to send some good cheer to this fire department and the paramedics that they get to their destination. Turns out to be a false alarm. They turn around and head right back, start at that barbecue or take a nap in their uneventful day. Sometimes no news is good news. I recognize that for myself. Okay, here's another fire truck. I live right behind a fire station, you guys. You've never popped into one of my lives before. This is something I routinely do because this is something they routinely do. And it is in my little drummer girl mindset that has this fantasy, these creative ideas that, right, I can create a little bit of positive outcome by throwing out that little bit of positive attitude, right? That could be somebody else's perspective, right? It's only a perspective of mine. It's not a perception of mine because I'm not a recipient of the evidence that it works. Those fire trucks are still going by my apartment, right? Consistently. But it is in my hopes, it is optimistically in my heart that, right, it does do a little bit of good. So it's a perspective of mine, right? Perspective is actually looking at the evidence. It's about putting yourself in other people's shoes, understanding that they're going to understand things a little bit differently than you. And to each of us, right, it is in that practice, it is in the perceptions, right, because the perceptions are our truths. But I know by my own experience, by the evidence in my own life, right, that my perceptions are kind of, right, a little bit of crooked in their rooting and in their growth, right? Because through my experiences, right, I had to be a little bit controlling of my own surroundings. And some of those surroundings is not just the safe space that I'm sitting in, but it is in my own mind. It is in my own sanity. It is in my own emotional intelligence. It is in the hopes that, that I get some of this, right? Because I do put myself in other people's shoes, because I am willing to be course corrected when necessary. Because for me, the most important thing is the truth. The most important thing is that understanding for myself. Optimistically, I'm hoping it's, right, an understanding that maybe, right, it's the greatest salesman that can make an understanding for ourselves, an understanding for everybody, right? And there are lots of those understandings out there that are, through its evidence, right, through its presentation in a lot of lives, that in the majority we have come to the conclusion that it has to be, right, a true perception. But lots of us, because of our unique experiences, through some of those traumatic experiences that we go through some of those controlling, right, hypervigilant tendencies that we have, right, that creative mind, that we can think up really good reasons, and right, we can delve in really, really deep and look at different perspectives, right? Look at different perspectives. Look at way people think about it, right? It's like looking at the different politicians and their ideas of, right, making America great again, and being able to put ourselves in those political arena and in those thoughts and decide for ourselves, right? That's why we're given that privilege to vote, right? That's being able to have a say, right? Our say is contributing to that sale, right? Because that sale is, right, not the sale as in a sail on a boat, but that sale as in something that we're selling to somebody or hoping to sell to somebody that isn't in the moment a perception, but is perspective. And in that perspective state, because we're putting ourselves in other people's shoes, that we have an opportunity to influence somebody, right? And if we're doing it right, we're influencing somebody in a way that is suited to their perspectives, right? To the way that they perceive the world, way that perceive their world. And at that moment, possibly, right, if they're willing, take on somebody else's perspective and move with that because they understand that their perception, right, wasn't so great. In the moment it served, in the moment it saved our butt, it might have saved your butt. And so I'm serving it again, right? In the hopes that it will hit properly a second time. But I have no problem being course corrected. And for most people, we do. What did I write here? We live in a perception based society, right? That's that narcissistic tendency, my way or the highway. I'm right, you're wrong. You'll You'll be better off if you do it my way. It's safer if you do it my way, right? My way or the highway, right? And I've lived by that. Okay, so maybe when I'm saying that, what hit me is my mother. I had a thought of my mother because that was not something she said, but it was a perception of hers. She was boss. She was boss of the entire family, of the way the household was run. Um, and it was her way or the highway. And so a lot of my perceptions were divvied out to me. They weren't truly mine. And a lot of this work, and we all know this, is to get rid of some of these things that we believe to be true, that in hindsight or in delving deeper or putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, that we have an opportunity to see something for what it is. We can see an untruth as an untruth, right? And we can see a truth that we thought was an untruth truly imprint on us, like like so deep that it becomes a perception that only a few minutes earlier had been replaced, right? So we should be living in a perspective state all the time, not a state of perception, because the perception is the beliefs, are those cores that you can't budge us from, right? We need to have a better understanding of where we made our mistakes. We need to be willing to be put on a right track, to be willing to take on somebody else's perspective, right? And maybe in that majority, we can turn that perspective, because now there's two of us with the same perspective. Maybe we could bring more on board in that and turn it into a perception, a worldwide perception, a perception that might help in creating the best human being we possibly can, because we got a little course correction. We're no longer going in that wrong direction. I said I was going to give um, an example of perception and being perceptive, right? It will be in my mother's my mother's idea. It would be in my ideas, my perception, right? Because of what my mother brought to the table. My perception was my mother was evil. This was a perception I had my entire life, that my mother was, right, fundamentally broken, and there was something not right about her, and she was trying to stuff down my throat some things that I didn't believe in. I had my own perspectives, and at the same time I had my own perceptions. Like I said, I thought my mother was evil, right? And the way she brought up her, well, we were all treated differently, but me in my own role, I'm just going to say from my own experience with my mother. It was only later on, I was always the good daughter, always listened, right? Her way or the highway. I got it, right? And I lived that way. That was a perception that was forced down my throat. But in the past six years, half a dozen years, I've been able to learn to trust my own feelings, trust and actually put myself in other people's shoes. And I got to realize that my mother was not necessarily the evil person that I thought she was, right? There was patterning, right? There were perspectives. And in her mind, in her perceptions, right, she was the boss of the family. And in my perspective, I believed it to be true, right? But she didn't get my respect, right? So I was able to look at it through my own eyes. And in my 50s, I guess I mellowed down a little bit. I was able to offer up some forgiveness in the situations, but not realizing that I needed to be forgiven in my own self, because as much as my mother rubbed me badly, I rubbed my mother badly too, right? And these were only things I come to understand later, that possibly through looking and putting myself in my mother's shoes, that uh, her experiences afforded her an experience with me, um, in postpartum depression. There was a lot of guilt and shame with that, right? That she couldn't love me the way that she was expected to love me, in that majority rules and the perspectives, right? That mothers are supposed to love their children, are supposed to care for their children, that are supposed to know what the job entails, and be able and want to do the best job that they possibly can. And that wasn't in my mother's capability, but that wasn't something I understood as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, right up until my mother passed away. I always looked at her as that evil person, right? So I had to let my perception fall away, right? I had to. I was willing because all I really wanted to know was the truth, right? Because I couldn't move anyway because I was being trapped in an untruth, in a perception that wasn't true, right? I learned to put myself in other people's shoes. She's the first one that I knowingly did that as an empath and as a highly sensitive. I've always done that. It's how I moved. But because there was that block, there was that wall, there was that already rooted perception that my mother was evil, I didn't go any further than that. Done deal. We're going to get past this now. But I wasn't able to get past that because I wasn't able to put myself in my mother's shoes, right? And my mother had some very, very scary, traumatic experiences that created the human being that she was, right? That created the perceptions that she had. And in turn, right, in passing those perceptions down and me accepting, right, my role and not looking any further than that, right? There wasn't any movement for her and there wasn't any movement for me until right till the very end, and she was the first person, right? And it in the beginning it was in the hypervigilance because I needed to know every single move that woman was going to make because it was so unpredictable, right? Things could switch just like that, and I knew that that was a perception, that was a truth, that was a truth, right? And that can't be taken from me, right? But the reasoning in that, that has to be taken away because those negative, hateful, right? Pitiful, condescending, right? Angry, hurt, heartbroken, all of those feelings and the rejection and not feeling loved in my life, the damage that that did to me, right? It doesn't change what happened, but it changes the way I look at how it was presented to me. Understood that, right? Hurt people. And I had to look at it in a different perspective. We got this word perception this week, you guys. Hello, Andrew. Okay, I'm just going to take a look. And I don't mean to trigger anybody, right? Because I do understand these are heavy topics, but they're meant to be heavy because we have to move forward. And in order to move forward, right, we have to understand where we got it wrong and where the people around us that we surround ourselves with willingly and unwillingly, how they get it wrong. Because as long as we have perspectives, right, we can always take in somebody else's point of view. We can always put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and see where it comes from. And then things get a little bit clearer, right? And we have a better understanding of what's true and what's not true, not just for us, but for everybody as a majority. And those who don't fall in that majority, right? Then those are the ones that we envelop, right? And with those understandings and with those perspectives, right? We pull them into the majority if we can, right? And that's where the sale is, right? That's where the influence is. That's where the goodness is. That's where the understanding, right? That it takes all kinds to make the world. And because of your experience in your early childhood, preteens, teenage years, adult years, that is going to be in your own experiences, your own heartbreaks, your own sets of grief, right? Other people's perceptions and your own perceptions that are a result of those perceptions, because I have a lot of those too. And grateful for the lessons along the way. Grateful for Wikipedia and for Google that, right, had some videos for me, had some answers for me. And it took a lot. It took a few videos for sure. And it took a lot. And I don't quite understand it, but we got all week to work on this word perception. And hopefully, right, somebody gets something out of this today. Okay, Andrew says, my father gave the impression he didn't like me. But as I look back, I'm embarrassed by the person I was as I was growing up, and I wouldn't want to be with me, right? Because we take on those things, sometimes it's hidden from us, right? Because we are taught to, right, to honor thy mother and thy father, and we are brought up to believe everything, that they are gods, that they are the be all to end all, that, right, my way or the highway, they're calling all the shots, they are God, right? And we believe what's being imprinted on us, what's being programmed into us, right? And I grew up thinking that I was obese. I'm looking at pictures of myself when I was 12 years old. But I remember when I was like 5 or 6 being told what a fat, disgusting pig I was, right? And again, I'm taking in the perspectives, right? The perceptions of others, not the perspectives of others, because if there was perspectives, they would have delved a little bit deeper, right? Wikipedia wasn't around, but there were books, there were doctors, there were sources of help out there, right? And even though we live in a digital age now, that information is a little bit more accessible to us. It was accessible back then too. But sometimes when we're so in our perceptions, we've already got those truths. So why are we delving in a little bit deeper? I thought I was a fatso, right? Well into my 50s. And right now, I'm probably the same weight as I was in my 50s. And I don't think that way anymore, right? And whether it gives me any resolution in the end, I have no idea, right? But I don't believe those things about me anymore, right? I don't believe I'm ugly. I don't believe I'm stupid. I don't believe I'm fat, right? I'm well rounded. I don't believe I'm miserable. I don't believe I'm the problem. Right? And that's when I say we have to be our own cheerleaders, right? And we have to be willing to course correct, because we have a lot of beliefs in us that aren't true, right? And I think when we talk about obstacles, and when we talk about being our own worst enemy, our own worst instigator, well, it's these perceptions that we've picked up along the way. And maybe it's just time for a little bit different perspective. And who's here? Cindy's here. But you know what? It could be Elon Musk. It could be Donald Trump. It could be Eco Toll, Eckhart Tolle, right? There are so many amazing people out there with perspectives, And each one of us get to pick and choose, right? We get drawn into the conversation and we pick up things along the way. But if we put ourselves in the shoes of the topic and delve a little bit deeper, and if we put ourselves in the shoes of the people who are having those right experiences that gave them those perspectives, that maybe if we're willing and if it's part of the majority, right, maybe we'll pick up a few of those great perspectives ourselves, or at the very least, right, peel off some of those perspectives, just like what Andrew says here, right? My father gave the impression he didn't like me, but as I look back, I'm embarrassed by the person I was as I was growing up, and I wouldn't want to be with me. Well, that was projected, right? We only are what we are, right? Who we surround ourselves with. And we can only take the blame for believing, right? But at the same time, you have to forgive yourself for believing, because it's beautiful that you believed in somebody, right? Even if they didn't deserve to be believed in. You did the right thing. You were the good son, just like I was the good daughter, right? And we're going to get better as we move forward. You can see, right? Wars are trying to start up and we're snuffing them out right and left. Maybe not instantly snuffing them out, but the moves that, right, these aggressors want to make, they're having a hard time in their projection of the aggression, right? In having the takeover manifest into something positive for them, right? It's not going to happen because we live in a world now where the majority is just not going to go for it. And things change. Things change when the majority has the perspective. When the majority has the perspective, we're moving together. We're not moving apart. And that is the truth. There are going to be stragglers who are going to be left behind, but that's what's going to happen. They're just going to be left behind. We're creating the best human being we possibly can. I think we're doing a pretty good job when we're asking ourselves these kind of questions, when we're taking ourselves into consideration and we're willing to, right, make a change if we have to, right? If that perception is so strong that it feels like a truth when yesterday it didn't, that's a good thing to follow through in more of our investigation. Okay, let's tie these comments out. Oh my goodness. Andrew says, at the time, that doesn't excuse my father's disdain and hostility towards me. I now see him as a lonely, depressed, unhappy person who felt unappreciated. But when a parent doesn't allow themselves to be known and pushes their child away, then the parent can't expect appreciation and fondness from the child. And you're 100% right. You know, that is a loss. I do believe, Andrew, that we come back with these same characters lifetime after lifetime. And it's not just in our small family. I think these characters and these groups run 100-fold, maybe 1,000-fold, but because of the rotation of our lives and the people walking in and out of it in different roles, right? In that influence, right? That it stunts our growth. It truly does stunt our growth, because even in my own family, I would have loved to have had that relationship with my mother, but me and my mother, we rubbed each other badly. I rubbed her just as bad as she rubbed me, because she didn't get my perspective and I didn't get her perspective, right? I didn't. And at that time, I wasn't willing and she wasn't willing. So the best that we could do was just avoid each other in my hypervigilance, right? try and second guess what her next move was, right? In my hypervigilance, talk myself out of those horrible things that were said to me, and I would be a cheerleader for myself and give myself those pep talks. And I truly knew at that time that the things that she was trying to force down my throat, that she was trying to make me believe about myself, were untruths. And it was reflective in my father's relationship, because that was the relationship I valued, was the relationship with my father. I didn't value the relationship that I had with my mother. But in saying in perspectives, my perception of my father also was wrong, right? Being a compulsive gambler in my adult life, right? In my perceptions of where I put myself, I got to perceive, right? And I got to put myself in my father's shoes and understand what happened within our family, right? Because I sure put myself in financial binds, but it was just me I was hurting. My father was hurting the entire family in his compulsions and in his addictions and in those things that he did in calming his system down, because he was on his own journey, right? A journey similar to mine, right? I am my father's daughter, but he had his own perceptions, his own perspectives, and where he may have gotten it wrong, right? By putting myself in my father's shoes, I have to understand that in the moment, he just might not have been strong enough to stand up against my mother, right? And my father's going to come back, and in that patterning, right? And in that magnetism, that energy of my mother, may, right? Find herself attached to that energy of my father, just like I found it myself in my own, right? Magnitude, that I found myself drawn to these same characters in my own life, right? But be able to, again, put myself in their shoes, look at it through their perceptions and their perspectives, right? And make that process a little bit easier, maybe not so harsh. Take away a little bit of that anger, a little bit of that disappointment, a little bit of that heartbreak that life didn't turn out the way it could have been, right? Because somebody didn't see life the way that I did, right? That I saw it a little bit different. And I can only live my life the way I perceive it, right? My movement dictates that it's happening in this moment, this exact moment. And it might be a different perception than what you have. You might have different perspectives to that, right? But maybe tomorrow, after a little bit of thought, a little bit of contemplation, a little bit of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? Maybe me and you will see eye to eye a little bit more alike. Okay. I treated my father with respect and obedience, right? Same here, Andrew, right? I got into that trap, and it was a trap because those are our parents, and right? We don't understand as children that our parents can be more broken than we could ever, well, expect to be, right? We usually grow up thinking that we were the problem. My mother was constantly summer vacation, Christmas holidays, right? She was always sending me off somewheres to spend with my aunt, or, right, to send me to camp, or let me go off with my dad on adventures because, right, it was painful for her. I was a reminder of what she wasn't, right? And I was a reminder of, well, a perspective that she wasn't able to force down my throat, right? That I didn't believe it, that I believed something else, right? And that left a wedge in our relationship, made a wedge so big that it's really hard to heal. And I would like to think that she came back a little bit better, right, than what she did in her last lifetime. But I suspect not, because she didn't wake to any of these ideas, right? It was just a matter of, right, her way or the highway, making the road as comfortable for herself as she possibly could. Okay. Um, Andrew says, I treated my father with respect and obedience, but maybe he saw it was only outward respect. Ah, see, this is where I got it too, right? Right? We talked about this last week, that sometimes they have the authority, but they don't have our hearts and they don't have our minds, right? That is 100% ours. And I think in that butting the heads with my mother too, my mother could recognize, right, that I didn't respect her, that I didn't believe that there was something wrong with me, right? Eventually, maybe, right? Because when things are repeated over and over and over again, sometimes we do cave in just to make peace with the world. And that is a truth, right? But it's true. They noticed, and you're a feeler, Andrew. You're 100% a feeler. So if you're a feeler, even though your dad didn't have your respect, right? He was a feeler too in his own experience as a child, an adolescent, a teenager, and as an adult himself, right? He didn't know how to be a father, probably because he didn't have that experience of having a good upbringing himself, right? Epigenetically, it just runs down from one generation to another. Okay. Uh, I treated my father with respect and obedience, but maybe he saw it was only an outward respect. There was no affection. He operated by being scary, and when there's fear, there's no room for healthy love. When I was very, very young, my mother rejected me, but she didn't hit me until I was 12 years old. So the physical part of it didn't really happen until I had reached my teenage years, right? And so there was always that desperation and that hope that I could turn my mother around by being the good daughter, by always being helpful and always being good and right, being helpful around the house with my sisters, that I thought maybe, right, that I could change my mother's mind. It never happened. It never happened, right? And I did have those conversations as an adult. When my husband was in the military and he went on a tour and he sent me to go stay with my mother for 6 months. I hadn't been home in 20 years and I had to go spend 6 months with my mother. My mother hadn't changed at all, but she was more willing to have those conversations only because I needed those answers and I pushed those conversations, right? And I asked her what it was about me that she didn't love, why she didn't love me, why she treated me the way she did. And she said, it's the silliest thing. It's the silliest answer that anybody could possibly give. But my mother said that when she breastfed me as a baby, I pushed her away. When she'd go to burp me or hold me or anything, I was always pushing her away. That's part of the postpartum depression. That's part of that. That's right. When she told me that, that was part of the understanding that came to me, right? That she must have suffered with postpartum depression that she wasn't capable of loving her child, or even trying to make a connection with her own child. The only reason I survived that experience is because I had my father and my father's family, my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, right? Who showed me that love and affection. And supposedly I was a very beautiful baby. Magazines, and there was these ponies that used to go down the blocks, and parents would bring their kids out and put their kids on the pony, and we'd take pictures, and they would always want me to be the main picture that they would use for advertising for these picture takings, because supposedly I was such a beautiful baby and I was treated as such, right? And so it was contradictory. So I had two perspectives being shot at me at the same time. And as a sensitive child, well, where do you think I was going to connect with? I wasn't going to connect with the pain. I wasn't going to connect with the rejection. I wasn't going to connect with the abuse. I wasn't going to connect with that which I thought was evil, right? And I get it, Andrew. I get it. Okay, so Andrew has his last comment. He says, I don't think my father liked it when faith and spirituality came into my life. And when my father was no longer the supreme being that I answered to a higher power. Narcissism, Andrew, right? My mother was a narcissist, and it's really, really strange because narcissists, they do think they are the be all to end all, that they have the final say, and they make sure that you understand that they have the final say. It is in their intent because they are covering pain themselves. That's really just another indicator where your father's experiences were from, right? That was through his own pain, and he had no idea how to connect with you. He had no idea, right? I hope if he is coming back that he is a better father now, right? That he found those answers. He figured out those obstacles that came across his path, right? And he's doing a little bit better by himself and a little bit better by others now. Yeah, those experiences, those experiences that impact us so much, that make it so hard for us to connect with others. And if we can't connect with others, how are we going to get those different perspectives? How? It doesn't matter how willing we are, right? But unless we can allow ourselves to get close, right? Not to put up so many walls to make it so that, right? Offer up that forgiveness so that possibly we can take another chance and get the lessons that we need. That's how it's worked with me. Thank you for Google and Wikipedia today, right? I had to delve in a little bit deeper today because I didn't quite understand the difference between perception and perspective, right? I understand it a little bit better now, but I wouldn't be surprised if this word perception shows up in this feed again. Okay, you guys, I am going to come out of whatever I'm coming out of now. I'm going to go outside for a little bit, maybe go to the grocery store and pick up some fruit or, right, some hamburgers, something, make myself a nice meal, enjoy my day off. We'll come at this word a little bit different tomorrow. Thank you, Andrew, for popping in and sharing what you have to share, because unless people really have an understanding that they're not the only one that have these experiences that impact our lives, right? That give us these perceptions that sometimes, right till our deathbed, we hold on to as if they're, right, the written truth, when, right, when all along they were just somebody's, right, perspective and not necessarily the right perspective that would make it a true perception for you. Okay, or for me myself. Okay, you guys, that's my good cheer. I got all kinds of stuff here, but we can say, but we got a few more days left in this topic. Everybody, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye.